Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another Beyond the Numbers. This is a podcast that is focused on meeting with executives, leaders from all different industries outside the finance organization to share their insights, to share their experiences, and to share their skills and everything that they've gained outside the finance organization. By brief introductions, my name is Chris Ortega. I'm the CEO of Fresh FP&A. I run a global fractional CFO and advisory services company that helps SMB businesses transform and scale their finance organization. And today's topic, I'm really excited about this one. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome exposed, beating that self-doubt. And my guest here today, Robert, tell a little bit about yourself. And for all the viewers and everybody, tell a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Robert Collier. I am the founder of Rob Collier Coaching, and I help entrepreneurs, executives, leaders, managers, sales professionals, and aspiring entrepreneurs to accomplish more in 90 days than most people do in a year. And I do that systematically through a process that I teach my clients and one that I learned and developed myself. So, Chris, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation with you about this topic, and looking forward to delivering some value.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We got connected through a great resource in that we both have, right? We got connected and diving right into the topic. I think one of the first questions I want to ask you, Robert, is you hear about imposter syndrome. Could you briefly, for everybody, explain what is imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so it's actually a more complex question than on the surface. So when we look at the definition of imposter syndrome, it is that persistent inability to believe that your success is deserved, and it's been legitimately achieved through your own efforts or skills. But Chris, if you're okay with it, I'd love to actually dive down to what imposter syndrome actually is. And this is something that I never hear talked about online or really anywhere, but I want to get to the heart of it. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Let's get to it, man.
All right, cool. So um, we're going to get a little bit technical, but stick with me. There was some research done by a guy named Nathaniel Brandon, and it was research on self-esteem. And what he defined and what he learned is that self-esteem has two quadrants. One is what's called
Mm,
self-efficacy, and the other is called self-respect, or yeah. And so self-efficacy looks at one's confidence to rise to the level of challenges in life. And that is, I believe that my thinking, my ability to make decisions is commensurate, is equal to life's challenges. That's self-efficacy.
mm.
Then we have self-respect. And self-respect is I'm worthy of happiness, that my value, my joy matters. And you can think about these things as sort of two wings of a bird, where if you want to fly, you need both of these to be operating well. And if one is slightly off tilt, then you're never flying correct in the right direction. And if the other is off tilt, you're constantly being weighed down and unable to go in the direction that you want. And so, what imposter syndrome truly is scientifically, it is when we have one of these wings slightly off. And it's typically going to be the self respect wing. And so, there's this pervasive feeling for a lot of folks who deal with imposter syndrome that, it's never enough, right? Especially for high achievers. There's constantly this ability to achieve all these great things that on the outside, others would congratulate us on and tell us that we're doing a great
Facts.
job. But internally,
Facts.
it feels like it's not enough. And that's because this wing is slightly tilted and off. So that's actually the real definition of imposter syndrome. And I'm sure we can go deeper into it as well.
Man, I love Robert how you talked about that and you gave the quadrants, right? And I just know, like, I think the first time, and this is me being honest and vulnerable to everybody, the first time I came across imposter syndrome, to everybody, I love this topic so much because even still today, I struggle with this. Like, this is a Achilles heel for me as a leader, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. And I remember the first time I came across imposter syndrome, and it was when I was in high school, ironically enough. I was very gifted in math classes. Like, if you can't tell, like, oh, a CFO not gifted in math. Yes. I was like in the honors level classes. I was like, as an eighth grader, taking like advanced calculus. And I remember finding myself, Robert, in this room. And I'll just be transparent with everybody, right? I was in this room. I'm a minority, right? Like, I'm Latino, I'm Italian, my mom is African American and Caucasian. So like I'm the other box, right? And I remember being in this room and I just was like, I don't think I should be here. Like, I felt out of place. I felt like my quantitative skills that got me in that arena, that I didn't deserve it, right? I'm around all these kids that are super smart. And when I was in high school, Pike High School, like most of the honors and advanced level classes, you had primarily, Caucasian people in there. And these were high influential people that did family vacations and had all this stuff. And that was like the first time I encountered this. And honestly, it's followed me throughout my career. And I think for people, it's subtle. That's the thing that I've learned about imposter syndrome, is that it's subtle. It kind of like creeps in over time. Like, I don't think you wake up one day and you're just like, oh man, like imposter syndrome is here. It's spaced out over time. At least for me, I've encountered this plenty of stages, and I'm looking forward to sharing more and hearing your insights. So one of my follow-up questions to the quadrants that you talked about is, let's talk about self-respect. What are some ways that you've coached or you've worked with people that they can like rebalance that quadrant for them? What are some action items or practical tips that you want to share to level up that self-respect?
Yeah. Well, first, your story mimics very much mine as well. I was also the kid in honors classes, did well in math, and didn't feel like I wasn't sure that I belonged there, right? Like, I remember actually really quickly, I remember being, I think it was in second grade. It was in second grade where I was told that the teachers wanted to hold me back. And, I was kind of troubled kid, but troubled in just that I just talked a lot. And I was constantly, just getting in trouble for talking too much in class, being a class clown, etc. And then I ended up getting some help from some extra attention in the areas of my life and in the classroom. And as a result of that, by fourth grade, that same school that wanted to hold me back 2 grades actually wanted to push me forward 2 grades. They said that Robert doesn't need to be in the fourth grade. He should be with sixth graders and up. So many times, like, there is that imposter syndrome. And to your point, like, it just shows up in various aspects of life. Sometimes it appears and sometimes it disappears. And so it has that ability to pop up. But you're asking a great question in terms of what are some of those practical things that we can do with the levels of self-respect. And first, what I want to do is I want to paint a picture of how this can actually impact us. And so when we talk about self-respect, beyond just the terminology of self-respect, that is the conviction of my own value, that I matter, that my happiness matters, and that I deserve to be happy. Now, let me give you a couple examples of what happens when that is not in alignment, using that metaphor of the bird. So when it's in disalignment, what happens is, let's just say, for example, maybe you are in line for a promotion, right? So you have this promotion coming up, and in the back of your mind, you're just like, I don't know that I deserve this. I don't know that I belong here. And so what happens is you have this fear. And so often with fear, the thing that we fear, we precipitate, and it actually becomes reality. And so in that case of maybe getting a promotion, you may begin to do things such as, in the past, you were always on time with your work. Well, now you may miss a deadline and get it done afterwards. You may snipe at your manager, your boss. You may do something that's inappropriate. And then as a result of that, you don't get the promotion. And in the back of your mind, what you say is, see, I knew that I didn't deserve that. I knew that I didn't belong. I knew that this was going to fail. Because unfortunately, Chris, what happens a lot of times is most people would rather be right than to be happy.
Ooh, wow. That right there, Robert, like that is, I think, one of the most important things that you talked about in there. And like right versus happy. And I think like where, and if I could give some, just to add on to what you said, like negative self-talk for everybody is real. Here's
Absolutely.
another, me raising my hand to everybody. Like I am the worst critic. Then like I'm so hard on myself all the time. Like there's never, and I learned this when I was younger. I learned this when I played basketball, when I was, when I was boxing. Like there's never anybody going to be harder on myself than me. And I think where I've struggled in that self-respect side that's caused me to, bounce in and out of imposter syndrome is really that negative self-talk, right? And there's a great quote. I don't know who says this, and I'll make sure if you know who said this quote, drop it in the comments, and I would love to see. But it says, "When there's no enemy within, the enemy outside can do no harm." Like that's so powerful because one of the good ways to I think that I've leveled up that self-respect is like I stop that negative self-talk, right? Where maybe I make a mistake and like everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect, right? And I say, it's okay, Chris. Give yourself that grace and say, hey, I've made this mistake, but here's what I learned from it, right? So I've always taken that negative self-talk and said, hey, if it's a learning and coachable moment that I can learn and be better for myself or help somebody else to prevent from making that same mistake, then that's a win. But I think a lot of it starts with you got to really get focused. You've got to really get intentional about that internal self-talk that you have, right? And I see it time and time again. I see it with entrepreneurs. I see it with business owners. I see it with founders. I see it with clients that we help support at Fresh FP&A. It's just like once that creeps in, it's like a multiplying effect, right? It's like once that negative self-doubt creeps in and you don't eliminate it, then that becomes an idea, and ideas become actions, and actions become results, and results become impact, right? So to me, it's like you got to really start at the root cause. And to me, it starts with that negative self-talk, man.
I love that. I love that. That's absolutely a great tip. And to the point about the root cause, like you want to understand what is the root cause of these things. And so I want to go back to answering your question about those actionable tips. So when we talk about that example of someone who is looking at getting a promotion and self-sabotages, or maybe even be in a relationship, knowing that they're never going to find the right person, right? Because we don't just separate ourselves from personal and professional. We bring our whole selves to both. And so if there's something lacking in either or, it's brought into the other place as well. And so here's the fundamental change that happens as a result of making sure that you're working on the self-respect. So what happens is you need to understand that in order to shift that, in order to change that, we need to act in a way that causes us to create more conviction in the value of ourselves. And so what that means is our behavior must match and be in alignment with our ideals. Now, let me give you an example of what that means. A quick test for you to kind of see what this looks like. And this is going to hurt a lot of people. And I got love for you, okay? I got love for you.
Let's get it, man.
Ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how much in alignment you are with your morals. When you ask that question, the reason why this hits, and if you're at anywhere between a 1 and a 5, or even up to a 7, the reason why this hits is because your integrity, am I doing right? Am I doing wrong? Am I doing what I said I'm going to do or not? That is one of those low-hanging indicators for whether we're acting in conviction with the value of ourselves. Because when we're acting in high conviction with the value of ourselves, we're doing that thing which is in integrity with the things that we want in the ways that we want to behave. And so if our moral decisions are not in alignment there, that's one telltale sign. A couple other ways. One is what you just spoke about, Chris. It's becoming aware of our self-talk, I always talk with my clients about the 3 A's of all change. And that is awareness, acknowledgement, and action. Let me break those
Nice.
down. Awareness is being aware that there is something wrong, or that there is an issue, or that there is an ability to change. If you don't have awareness, you can never take action to make that change. All change starts with awareness. Then second is we need to acknowledge that there's the ability to change, because the alcoholic who is aware that they're an alcoholic, but they don't acknowledge that they have a problem, will never change. So we must acknowledge that there is an issue. Then and only then can we take action. These are the 3 A's, my 3 A's framework for change. So with that, with self-talk, become aware of that self-talk, become aware of that inner critic, acknowledge that it exists, and then change the way in which you speak. Give yourself more grace. Also, by the way, ironically, when you give more grace to others, you'll give more grace to yourself. It's funny how that works. When we change the way we behave on the outside, we do the same within. And the last way that you can do this, a last quick example, practical tip, is doing hard things and also being aware and acknowledging your wins. So a quick example of this, Chris, is when I work with clients, I'll work with them over the period of 90 days. We'll identify what their goals are, and then we'll incrementally work towards those goals. 96% of the people I work with say that our work together is life-changing because we're actually getting to the root cause of their issues, to your point, and that is that self-image piece. The one thing that I do for my high achievers that just transforms the relationship with themselves is every night I ask them to write 6 wins from the day. And so they'll just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they'll write down 6 wins from the day. For those who have that imposter syndrome, who are very critical with themselves, this changes and fundamentally shifts the relationship with themselves, because now they're starting to acknowledge what were the good things about the day. You know what? That was a win. And for a lot of people, it's tough at first, Chris. Like they're like, man, did I get 6 wins from the day? I don't know that I have wins from the day, you know? But over time, you develop that ability, that habit, that muscle to recognize, oh, these are the wins in my life. You begin to write those down, and it changes, it rewires your relationship with yourself. So those are 3 practical tips.
Man, dude, like this was, I think for me, like I was sitting here taking notes. That's why if people see me off screen, right? And the number one thing I love about that, what you talked about, is like your 3 A's, right? Awareness, acknowledgement, and action. That framework can be applied to so many other things. So like how you enable people to say, hey, these are Robert's 3 A's around change. I think where most people struggle, and I say this too, right? I think self-awareness, and this gets into like a whole conversation. I want to take it here a little bit, Robert. I think self-awareness, as that first A that you talked about, that requires a lot of emotional intelligence and not intellectual. So it requires a lot more EQ about yourself than it is IQ. And when you look at, professionals, I'm talking to CFOs, finance, these type A, these high performer, high potential people, like we pride ourselves in having very, very high IQ, right? But to me, when you want to drive and get over this imposter syndrome, I think emotional intelligence, as it couples with that self-awareness, is like, you got to do that. Like, I check in with my emotions all the time. Like, when something's making me feel frustrated, I'm like, I don't stop. I don't like go into the situation with this frustration. I've learned to say, hey, Chris, take a step back in that moment and say, Chris, why are you frustrated? Like, what is it that is causing you to be frustrated? The same way you could be in your passion, right? Like when I find myself working with clients, when I find myself working with my team, when I find myself providing value to our clients, helping them grow their businesses, like I see my energy level go up. I also ask that question and say, Chris, like, why are you feeling this way, right? And I think to me, like in that awareness side, that's where you can really tap in. And it's difficult. It's difficult because predominantly talking with CFOs and finance professionals, we're very quantitative.
Hmm.
We're very like linear. We're very number focused. But when you turn up that EQ, you're turning up that whole qualitative side of thinking about things, right? Um, so that framework and that practical tip in those 3 A's, I could just see tremendously how that provides value to, and it also provides like a baseline. I'm always looking at things in ranges, right? Like, how do I look at something and say, here's where my baseline is, and how can I work to get better? Like, I'm here, but I want to get to this place. How can I work to do that? And your last third piece of advice that I think is like super valuable for everybody watching this, and that is like going into those challenges, but celebrating the wins, Robert. Like you said that, and that hit me, bro. I'm telling you, that was like, I need to do that tonight. I need maybe not 6, because anytime I feel like 6, I'm like, Chris, come on, man. Like, it's really your top 3, bro. Like, but taking that time though, like, that's such a valuable insight, and so like that's such an expert insight to provide to people, because we're as a high performer type A person, I am always like, hey, I know whatever my wins are, I'm going to keep doing that. Tell me how I can get better. What can I improve on? What can I get better on? But being intentional of taking that time and saying, hey, today, here were my top 3 personal wins. Here were my top 3 professional wins. Here were my top 3, like, in my family wins, right? Like, being able to have that time of that attitude of gratitude, and not that attitude of like, how can I get better? Man, I love those practical tips, man.
I appreciate that. I love what you said so much, and I appreciate that as well. And there's a couple things that I want to speak to what you just shared, right? So,
Yeah.
one is on that intellectual awareness and intelligence versus emotional awareness and intelligence. You are so right. Like, there's both service us in one way or the other. But let me tell you, there's a lot of brilliant people that do remarkably stupid things. There's a lot
Facts.
of
Yes.
brilliant people that self-sabotage their way, right? So the IQ isn't the only thing. That EQ is incredibly important. Um, Another element is when you talk about those 6 wins and what that enables us to do. I think that's the direction I wanted to go. I had like 3 things in my head, but yeah, I think when we talk about those 6 wins and its impact to us, it does allow us to recognize the wins and actually to celebrate them. But the other thing, that's what it was on the awareness side. When we think about the 3 A's, when we think about awareness, one thing that's super important. So all my high achievers, all those who are experiencing imposter syndrome in some time, think about the first A, the awareness, and ask yourself this question. Chris was really kind of alluding to this when you talk about the negative self-talk. If you've achieved so much and you still feel so empty, one question you should be asking yourself is, who created my goals?
Ooh.
Right? Like the goals that I'm going after, are they mine? Or are these the voice of some significant other which created my goals without my control and approval?
That hits. That hits right there, Robert.
Yeah, because so often we hear our parents' voices from childhood. We hear significant others and loved ones who had good intentions, but bad results on us as adults. And part of being an adult is unlearning all the bad stuff that we learned as a child. And so we need to question, combat, and challenge those thoughts, but also we need to combat, question, and challenge the root of them, which is who created these goals. Because the worst thing when we talk about this hamster wheel, a lot of times we talk about it in terms of a 9 to 5, but there's also the hamster wheel of thinking. And if we're continually going around this hamster wheel and we're doing all these amazing things and yet we're still feeling empty, we must ask ourselves, who is it that created these goals? Because in the
Nice.
end, if we continue down that path and we still feel empty, guess what? It's never going to stop. It's just going to continue going here. And at some point, that awareness enables us to say, you know what? That's the voice of my mom. That's the voice of my dad. That's the voice of my uncle. Acknowledge that those may not even be your goals. Have that self-talk that you talked about, Chris, but then take action against it. So I wanted to make sure that I brought that up.
Man, Robert, that question, right? This conversation, man, is so insightful to me because we are really getting to the thick of it, right? Because I look at, when I was give you a great example of that, right? Like when I was going through building high growth businesses, right? And I got to the top of my career, right? I reached the very mountaintop of the finance profession, right? And I felt like I arrived, but I remember having a conversation with my sister, and it was eye-opening to me. And this was like just the transparency for everybody. This was the catalyst that started Fresh FP&A. So like what I'm sharing right now is like why I took 2 decades of experience in accounting, finance, FP&A, and financial leadership and said, I'm taking a leap of faith. And I was having this conversation with my sister, and she was like, I just went to a Series B level company. Things didn't work out. I was part of a reduction in force, and all these dominoes happen. And I'm like, I found myself at this stage of my career where like, man, I'm at the mountaintop. I'm at the very mountaintop. And do I continue to go down this path, or I had this other path? I was conflicted. And I had this conversation with my twin sister, Victoria Ortega. I had this with her, and I was just telling her, I was solutioning through with her. She said something super simple, Chris. She says, Chris, when are you going to start chasing your purpose over praise? When are you going to start chasing your passion over profit? And when are you going to start chasing people? And when are you going to start taking impact over income? Like once she said that to me, I could still, I get chills because I still go back to that moment, Robert, where it was like, man, I'm chasing after all. I'm like, I'm not focused. And it get back to your example you talked about. So much of what drives us professionally, what drives us in our home life, what drives us with our friends, all the different hats that we wear as professionals, as brothers and sisters, as boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband, all the different hats that you wear. That question you got to say is like, hey, am I really in control of this? Right? Like, is the reason why I'm not being fulfilled or feel like I'm winning is because I'm not even playing the same game I'm playing a different game. Like, I want to be winning at basketball, but all my goals and what my coaches is telling me, what my mom wants me to do, I've been playing baseball, right? You're in a whole different game. So that question is really eye-opening because that makes you take a step back and say, man, am I really chasing after the right thing? Like what? And I would even take it a step further. Is like, what is your goals? But ultimately, like, what does success look like for you? Not for your family, not for your manager or boss, not for your wife or husband, not for your partner, but what does success look like for you? How does that, and then how does that feel? Like, what does success for me feel like? And really tap into that emotion and say, man, when I'm operating at my best, when I'm making an impact, when I'm fully focused on my purpose, and I'm not focused on praise, and I'm like dialed in, here's what success feels like. Right. And that could be as you do that throughout the day. That could be to Robert as your question at the end of the day is like, what are those wins? But truly saying, like, what are those wins that I felt like these are wins that are aligned to where my goals, my actions, and my behaviors and everything I committed to do and commit to that, right? I absolutely love that question, man. I think that's so insightful and thought provoking.
That's really awesome, Chris. And I'm enjoying this conversation so much because you're bringing up so many things. You're bringing up so many thoughts. You're bringing up so many experiences and reflections. And one thing is true, that it's difficult to win when you don't know where the goal is.
Yeah.
Like it's difficult to put numbers up on the scoreboard if you're playing the wrong game.
Facts.
And so those, what you're talking about, right? Like, again, I like to go down to the root. And when fear is what's driving us, then we continue to precipitate the thing that we fear, but also we have a desire to prove ourselves, prove that we belong, prove that we can do it, prove to others that they were wrong. Now, I'll tell you flat out, a lot of the people that we look up to, you know, this guy right behind me, right, Kobe, like he might be a manifestation of this. Michael Jordan, you know, all these athletes, they're working from that prove it. And at the flip side, you also hear that it's never quite enough,
Yeah.
right? Like whether it's Tom Brady wanting, he couldn't retire, it's never quite enough. Jordan can't watch a basketball game because he wants to get in there. And there's elements of that, right? Like you can hit the mountaintop, but you won't feel fulfilled when fear is your motor. Now, when joy is your motor, it's more of a desire to express yourself creatively, right? Instead of proving yourself, it's, I want to live out my possibilities. And the other thing that you said that really brings up something that's super important is your state, right? Like you talk about what's the emotion, what does success look like, how will it feel? That's one of the things that I work with people on, is getting them into a state that is divorced from how they've been feeling, whether it's a lack of motivation, whether it's procrastinating, whether it's feeling unorganized, unstructured, lack of discipline and focus, getting them into a state of ultimately where they want to be a year from now, and doing that today.
Nice.
And helping them to get into a state where ultimately the things that they want are being pulled to them. And, you know, that's how they end up accomplishing, as my tagline is, people accomplish more in 90 days than most people do in a year, in part because of this conversation we're having and getting into that appropriate state.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to go into that a little bit more, because you brought up fear a lot. And I think this may be something that all the viewers, whether you're live or going to go back and play this on all the different places we are right now. But what are some practical ways that you can share for people to overcome fear, right? Because that to me, when I'm looking back at like the self-respect that we talked about, I looked at the 3 A's that your 3 A's that are drive change. We brought up fear a lot. So I want to dive into it, get your insights and perspective. What are some ways that people can overcome fear?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's really kind of complex. So one is we need to be aware of what it is that we fear. There's fear of success, there's fear of failure, there's fear of putting ourselves out there, there's fear of reaching our full potential, and the reaction, the response from other people. Maybe we outgrow a husband or wife or partner. There's all these fears in how they manifest.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a few ways that we get around those fears. And I'm not going to use the trite things that we simply, you know, do it anyway. Those things are true, but more fundamentally than that, it's working on the self-image, right? So I'm going to share with you something that that has really impacted the work that I do in all my clients. There's an old saying in psychology that says you cannot outperform your own self-image.
Ooh.
And what that means is your self-image acts as a sort of box or container, just much like this. And so when you try to do something that's inside this box, you can do it. You can grab it if you want to have this goal and accomplish it, etc. The problem is when you try to do something that's outside this box, and that's when this box becomes a cage. That's when this container becomes a cage. You can't do it because it's outside. And so the work is actually enlarging one's self-image. Part of the way that we do that is by repeatedly doing things that, again, cause us to admire and have conviction within the value of ourselves and behave in alignment with those things. Now, practically speaking, what does that look like? What does that mean, Rob? Here's what it means. It means, one, identifying what it is that you truly want, being clear, getting clarity on what that is. Two, then it means taking steps every day towards that end. Every day towards that end. Once you're clear on what it is that you want, your purpose, the thing that you want to achieve, who you want to become, the impact that you want to create, the effect that you want to have, then every single day, at the very least, if we're talking about work, Monday through Friday, but every day you work towards that. And so that may mean getting up earlier. That may mean committing time to growing your business while working that full-time job. That may mean spending more time with your family and being present. And if those things are hard, then you find someone that you can help become accountable to that will support you in that effort. The thing that's important is you want to start small.
Okay.
When you start too big, it's like a snowball, right? Like if you get a snowball and you push it, it has real potential. But if you push it the right amount each day, then over time that snowball gets bigger and bigger. But if you try too much, you try to create this huge mountain, then you're never going to have the motivation to keep pushing it, right? But you push it day after day in just the right amount, just the right direction, that snowball can become an avalanche of income, an avalanche of impact, an avalanche of freedom, an avalanche of fulfillment. And so you start small on those things and consistently do it on a day in, day out basis. And over time, that small step that you take ends up having a big result. So practically speaking, that is identifying, getting clear on what it is that you want, taking steps, incremental steps each day. And if that's difficult for you, no problem. Find an expert, find the support that will help you to get there, someone who you also respect that will help to support you to get there. And then as a result of that, you'll see that your self-image, that container we talked about, begins to expand so that the things that you want to do are now within reach.
Perfect. And again, man, the thing I love is like you break this down, you can tell that you provide so much impact to people. You can tell that your coaching delivers results because you have mastery level to really break it down in the linear step and be able to say, hey, here's the action plan for you to be able to do, right? And to me, it's like, plan. I always say like plan the work and work the plan, right?
Yeah.
And for me, you talked about this. One of the biggest fears that I think professionals have and just overall is this fear of failure. And for me, like when I get asked, and I was just on a podcast like a week ago, and somebody asked me, and they were like, "Chris, what is like one of your superpowers that nobody would know?" Right? And I was thinking through this, and I said, you know what? I wake up every day and I look for failure. And I remember saying this, and he said, like the interviewer sat back and was like, "Chris, did you mean to say that?" Like I was like, "Yeah." He was like, we got to dive into that. And I said, the reason why I look for failure is because that's one of the biggest fears anyone has, right? The fear of failure, I would say, in tops of all fears, I also fear, like, what's another? I don't fear spiders or anything. I think spiders are cool. They're great for the environment. There's very little things that I fear, but failure was like one of those biggest ones. And I said, what better way for me to get comfortable around this fear than if I just go chase it? And it's like the most counterintuitive thing. You're like, Chris, what are you talking about? But the moment that I got and faced failure, and I realized two things when I had this attitude that I'm gonna find ways to fail, I realized in my life that there's only really two options that I'm gonna get from that situation. I'm either gonna win or I'm gonna learn. So like, is the fear of failure actually bad if you win or learn from it? So like the math. Here's me mathing right now, Rob. In my
Right.
head, my math is mathing right now, and I was like, well, if X is failure and failure is not bad, it's not a negative, and I can always win or learn from it, then it's a win. So that fear of me getting over is like, man, I look at failure because I've some of the biggest professional, the biggest personal, the biggest emotional moments and comfort zone expanding moments and experiences that I've had in my life is because I failed,
Yeah.
right? And once you get comfortable to say, hey, I acknowledge I made this mistake, I failed at this, right?
Mhm.
Here's what I learned from it. And this learning I'm going to take that's going to make me better in the future, but it also can be able to help somebody else to not make that same again. So it's like failure, if you look at it from that perspective of a completely different, let me be on brand, right? If you look at it from a fresh view, right? Like it is a win. And I think, like, as you talked about even before, like finding those ways and taking those practical steps every day. Like, hey, I want to get over this. Here's the action plan that I have. Here's the dedication that I'm going to commit to doing that every day, right? It kind of boils down to what we work with our clients on. Like, I call it like the vision to execution framework, right? It's vision, strategy, tactics, metrics, milestone, execution. So the same way that funnel drives business outcomes and results, you can take that, your framework that you mentioned of saying, hey, acknowledge it, find the goals that you want to achieve, tackle that goal every day, and monitor and make sure you have somebody like you holding those people accountable to say, hey, I'm going to be in this with you. Accountability and having I call it like a great conflict community, where it's like I've got people in my network, I've got mentors, I got business leaders, I got entrepreneurs, I got partners that I love. I could go to an idea, and they look across from me, Rob, and say, Chris, that's stupid. And I'm like, thank you. Like, help me understand why that's stupid. Like, I have such a amount of trust and respect for these people that we could be very direct and they can hold me accountable. They can say, Chris, you're dumb, or Chris, you made a mistake, or Chris, that was awesome. So make sure you have that community of people, man. And I think like your practical tips to give the people to overcome fear, whatever that fear is, right? That is a great framework and a great foundation that you can go take and build right now.
100%, Chris, 100%. And one thing to add to that as well, I love that you have that network of people that connect with you and that support you and that you're open to receiving that feedback, right? Because there's a fear of
Yep.
receiving that feedback. But you've obviously, as you built your business, as you built yourself, you've enabled yourself to open up to that. And I've done the same. And one of the things that I want to add to this aspect of accountability, a lot of people think accountability is like, you know what, I don't need to be accountable to somebody else. Like I want to be accountable to myself. And sometimes it takes getting rid of that ego and just being honest and saying, you know what, I need help. I'm not going to let ego stand in the way between the goals that I have for my family, the goals of impact that I have for others, and the goals that I have for myself. I'm not going to let ego stand in the way of that. I need help. And when you can do that and you find someone that you can be accountable to, then over time, what happens is you become accountable to yourself. Yep. And it's okay to take that reflection to know that, you know what, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I can get there. And I'm going to look for help to get there. And I'm going to be happy I did it because one way or the other, whether it was by myself or with somebody else, I'm getting to the goal.
Absolutely. And like what you talked about is saying like, I need help. A person that is able within themselves to say, hey, to come to you, Robert, and say, Robert, I need help in managing my household, or I need help in managing my professional career, or I need help in change, or I need help in fear, right? That in and of itself is a person that has high EQ. That's high emotional intelligence, right? Because that could be another fear is like, oh man, I think another fear tied to imposter syndrome is like for leaders. I've had this. I meet so many different CEOs, business owners, CFOs, all different kind of C-suite executives all across the globe. And I think one common stereotype that a lot of leaders have is that when there's a problem, every leader needs to be like, hey, you need to have the solution and you need a marshal. When I was progressing throughout and even leading Fresh FP&A and leading a global business, right? I self-reflect and say, hey, I don't know the answer to this, right? But I want us to work together to figure it out. And I want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence and get my insights to say that it's okay to be as a leader to say you're not supposed to have all the answers. I actually think if there's a leader that has a response and an answer for every question, something's not right about that, because there's no way you got a solution for everything, right? But taking that moment to say, hey, I don't know the answer to this, and it's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm committed to make sure we figure this out together. I'm open to feedback, and I'm optimistic that no matter the situation and no matter the outcome, we're going to be better and stronger because of this, right? Like, that in and of itself is tying back to something we talked about earlier, which is really tapping in to that emotional power. This is me, and I may be rogue and say this, Robert. I want to get your thoughts on this. I think the successful leaders of the future, the ones driving billion-dollar businesses, the superstars of business and superstars of your life overall, when you look at this balance between EQ and IQ, you're going to have a lot of those leaders have a lot more emotional intelligence than IQ. I think that is a key differentiator between a good leader and a great leader is high emotional intelligence. And everything we're talking about right now helps equip you, empower you, and you've got everybody has a resource with Robert and his coaching to be able to help you on this journey. So now you have that community support as well too. So everybody watching this, whether you're watching it live or playing this back on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the different streams that we're on, you have a resource. There should be no excuse of you getting the insights, the knowledge, the practical tips and framework that you need to be able to help you drive success in your career and drive success in your personal life. So, hey, Robert, man, love this conversation. I know we could dive in a lot deeper on everything. One last question I want to ask you for and get your insights on is, when people are challenged with this imposter syndrome, what are some resources? Like, would you share some resources, some books that you read, some articles, some of your coaching stuff? What are some resources that other people can have that they can dive deeper into this, dive deeper into some of your 3As? What are some of those resources you like to share?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that's a little bit radical, particularly within the United States, because of our consumer culture. Books and those things, like there's only so much that books are going to help.
Yep.
Like just be honest. Like
I'm with you, bro. I'm not gonna pick up a 300-page book and read it. I'm like, bro, I need to get this in ChatGPT. ChatGPT, read this book. Give me the top 10 things I need to know. Give me practical use cases. Like, I'm like that, bro.
Well, and what I mean is that, like, books can help. There's the intellectual knowledge of that, but knowing something intellectually is not going to change your experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. And so if you want to learn about imposter syndrome, there's tons of stuff that you can Google. You can go on ChatGPT. If you want to actually shift away from it, if you actually want to combat it and overcome it, that's something that you experience. A book isn't going to give you that. A book is up here, but you're changing your experiencing of it. That is the work that's done.
That's in the heart, bro.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's like, I could give you books, but no, I'm not going to give you books, because that's a nice way to be like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to noodle on this and then not change. And then you're going to watch another podcast about it a year from now and be in the same place. And I care more for other people than to just give that sort of easy out. So, and on the same side, I understand how what I'm going to say is could sound, but to be honest, on the imposter syndrome stuff, I'd recommend either, you can read some of the stuff that I share, etc. But honestly, finding that person that's going to help you to change and shift those two wings that I talked about, the self-efficacy and the self-respect. There's practical things that we talked about today that you can do that. And if you're a person who you have big goals, you want to achieve, whether it's a promotion or the next level in your career, or you want to achieve a sales quota, or you want to start and grow that business even more, or maybe you could cruise the rest of your life without a challenge and be happy, but you want more for your family and you want more for yourself, I would encourage you to have a conversation with me. And we can have that conversation.
Absolutely.
And the work that I do, I know from the people that I've worked with over 200 professionals, 96% of them say that the work that we do is life-changing. And that's because we get to the root, and it's not just up here, it's not just intellectually, it's experientially that we make those changes. So that's the honest answer of what I would suggest. And if it's not me, find somebody else that helps you with these things. But get to the root of it, get to the experience of it so that you can shift your thinking and your behavior, right? Because in my opinion, learning is not just learning new knowledge, it's changed behavior. So get to the point where you're changing your behavior. Whoever that is, go after that.
Absolutely, man. I am not a book person, and I'm glad you said that. I'm like, man, I want to go read something and put it to action. Like let me go experiment, go create those MVPs. Robert, this has been such a great conversation. So much insights. I was sitting here taking notes. I've learned a lot from you. For all those viewers, if they want to connect with you more, if they want to learn more about your coaching, learn more about how you can help them in their careers, how you can help them in their lives to be the most successful person overall, where could they find you? Where can they learn more? How can they connect with you on your coaching? Share your resources.
Yeah, so there's two places that I'd recommend for you to go. Number one is my website, robcollier.com/system. And that's going to share with you a lot more about the coaching, the work that I do. You'll hear from some of the people I've helped, whether it was Isaac, who closed $96,000, earned a promotion, lost 16 pounds in 90 days. Kevin, and this sounds crazy, but Kevin, who ended up bringing in $4 to $5 million net new money in his business within 90 days. Alicia, who ended up battling and overcoming that imposter syndrome and going out and doing the things that she wanted to do, and so many more. So that's robcollier.com, robcollier.com/system. And the second way is just on LinkedIn. You can visit with me on LinkedIn. That's linkedin.com/in/Robert J. Collier. And you can see all my posts. I share a lot of information and content for free that I just hope that supports you in your journey. I love working with people who want to become the best version of themselves. Those are my tribe.
Let's go. Hey, I highly recommend that. For everybody watching, we'll make sure to drop those links in the description to Rob's website to connect with him. Please follow, connect, message Rob on all the socials, particularly LinkedIn. Again, for all the viewers, we'll drop that in the comments in the video description. So we got you covered. Robert, thank you so much, man, for your time. Thank you so much for your energy. Thank you so much for your perspective. I took away, so I feel empowered, bro. Like a lot of times when I'm with guests and they're like, Chris, I feel like I can run through a wall. After having this conversation with you, bro, I feel empowered. I feel enabled. I'm going to take your advice and I'm going to write a journal of 3 wins. I don't know about 6. I think I need to work up to 6, but I'll take 3 wins, man. So thank you so much for your time, energy, and insights and discussion today, Robert.
Chris, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed our conversation. I learned a lot from you as well. And I look forward to, continuing the conversation online in the chats. And last thing, special thanks to Alicia for connecting us and enabling
Shout
us
out to
have
Alicia Kissel. Absolute salute. Alicia, you are the real MVP. So, hey,
Facts.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for another Coming to Beyond the Numbers. This is if you've enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe to our channel. That way you don't miss any other conversations, updates that we got. We got a lot of great things going on here at Fresh FP&A. Beyond the Numbers is a podcast focused on getting outside the finance organization, meet with great professionals, leaders, and giving you the empowerment and skills and experiences to help you be a great professional and, more so than anything, a great person. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your insights. And as I always end, keep pushing, never settle, and the best is yet to come. Let's get it. Thank you, everybody.